A Magic deck can come in a few sizes. You can play with 40 cards, 60 cards, and 100 cards. In most of the ways Magic is played, you're going to have a 60 card deck. That's what we call a library or your main deck. You will also have a 15 card side deck or a sideboard where you can pull cards in between matches to customize your deck to be better suited against your opponents. But we're not covering sideboards today. Magic decks have two main parts, your land base and your spells. So first, let's talk about lands. While they might not be as exciting as the spells you'll cast in the game, how you design your lands in your deck is actually one of the most important parts of deck building. And this is actually one of the reasons why Magic is such an elegant game. You want to design your deck in a way where when you first draw your 7 cards, you want to start the game with a good amount of lands to play on each of your turns. But it's a careful balance. Too few lands, you won't be able to play your spells and you'll fall behind. Draw too many lands, and you won't have enough spells to play. That's why the number of lands you play in your deck is very important. A safe rule of thumb that I like to follow is 24 lands in a 60 card deck. Now there's a few ways we can adjust this. First, the quantity of lands can change based on the mana curve of your deck. A mana curve is basically a line that represents how many cards you have in each casting cost. So if you have an aggressive deck, you probably have a curve that has more cards in the left side of 1 and 2 mana spells, versus a slower control deck might have more spells in the later end of the curve because they play bigger spells. So what I do when I'm building a Magic deck is I put all the cards I want into separate piles for each of their casting costs. And then I count them up and see what my curve is like. If my curve is on the lower end with more cheap spells, then I can adjust my lands to be something more like 20 to 22. This helps me draw more spells rather than lands so I can keep up the aggression. If I notice my curve is on the higher end with more big expensive spells in the 5 and 6 mana range, I can adjust my lands to be 25 to 26 lands to make sure I can draw enough lands while I'm playing to cast these big spells. If my deck is something in between, then 24 lands is totally fine. And if you're worried about your own land count, as I said earlier, you can always just start with 24 and fill out the rest of the deck with your spells. The next part about building a mana base is colors. The more colors your deck has, the more difficult it will be to balance out your land base. For example, a green deck will only need forests, very easy. A blue, green, and red deck will need different distributions of islands, forests, and mountains to play all the different spells, much more difficult. So how you decide this is you take all the spells in your deck and split them up into different color piles the way we did for our mana curve. Then you can count how many spells of each color you have and then roughly estimate what percentage of your deck they make up. So in this example, I have a 60 card deck that is both blue and red, and it has 36 spells. And amongst these spells, I have 20 blue spells and 16 red spells. So based on this, I know I'll need a few more islands than I need mountains. Once you get to 3 color, that's when it gets much more difficult. Here, this is when we start playing with the 2 color lands that come in the kit, such as the guild gates or the temples. In the same way we figured out a 2 color deck, for high color decks, you still split up your deck into different piles of colors, then figure it out. So if I know my blue, green, and red deck has a lot of red spells, then I want more 2 color lands that make red, in addition to the other colors in my deck, green and blue. The last part of building a land base is utility lands. Lands don't only have to make mana, they can also provide some tools to your deck, such as Demolition Field to destroy other utility lands, or Crawling Barrens that can become a creature and deal damage to your opponent. These lands aren't crucial to your land base, but if you want to experiment with adding some more of the utility lands, they can really help make your deck stronger. I wouldn't recommend doing this in a higher color deck in the beginning, because you'll probably be working on balancing the colors first, but once you're ready, finding lands that complement your strategy is a very nice finish. And if you want to learn more about how to play with these lands, we'll have a deep dive in all the lands that come in the starter kit in a future video. Now that we've talked about our lands, let's get to the spells. So if we're following the standard 24 lands number I shared with you earlier, then finishing out your deck means finding 36 more cards to put in your deck. Very easy. There's a lot of strategy involved in how to build different Magic decks. So in the following videos, I'll be sharing how to build different levels of Magic decks in terms of complexity, and also how to build different archetypes of Magic decks from the kit. But from a fundamental level, deck building is actually quite simple. As a new deck designer, you want to play more creatures and threats, because the game generally favors the aggressor. If you have a big creature and your opponent doesn't have the right answer, they'll lose the game very quickly. Knowing that, what I recommend is for you to take a look at the creatures in the starter kit and pick any of the creatures that just look cool to you. And once you've pulled out enough of those cards and read what they do, then you just find cards that seem to synergize with them well. For example, if you want to play with Lyra Dawnbringer, she's a big angel that makes other angels stronger and gains you life whenever she deals damage. So, we want to play other angels that gain this benefit from her, like Inspiring Overseer or Angel Finality. And also, we want creatures that benefit from the life gain, such as a Johnny's Pridemate. As long as you fill out most of your deck with creatures and threats, you can't really go wrong. A good range to play with is something between 20 to 30 creatures. The last thing is you always want answers to deal with your opponent's threats. So filling out the rest of your deck with instants, sorceries, or even enchantments that can remove creatures is very important. Magic decks can take a lot of different forms and strategies. This is just one very simple way to get started with deck building. Again, in the following video, I'll be covering the different archetypes of decks for you to reference, with examples of deck lists I built from the kit, and also examples of how complex a Magic deck can be. If you like this, please consider supporting your local game store and buying a starter kit to try out for yourself. In the next video, I'll cover the levels of deck building. See you there.